Fugitive finds collapsed millionaire with 3 babies on a rural road. But as she tries to help, someone appears behind her and comment and rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The rural road stretched like a forgotten scar across the landscape, covered in dust and surrounded by empty fields that seemed to reach to the horizon. The 30-year-old fugitive walked with calculated steps, each movement revealing the tension of someone constantly looking over their shoulder. Her simple, worn clothes contrasted with the meticulous care she took to avoid the most exposed parts of the road, always seeking the shadows of the sparse trees that dotted the path. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip when she spotted something that made her heart race. A luxury car, its gleaming body now deformed and scratched, was overturned a few yards ahead, half hidden by a small rise in the ground. The silence of the afternoon was shattered by a sound that chilled her blood. Desperate cries of babies echoing from inside the vehicle. Her first reaction was to turn and run. For months, she had perfected the art of avoiding any situation that could expose her, any scenario that forced her to interact with other people. The instinct for survival screamed at her to keep walking, to ignore those disturbing sounds and continue on her way. But the cries intensified, filled with an urgency that awakened something deep in her chest, a familiar pain that she had tried so hard to bury. She approached cautiously, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. The car was clearly expensive, the kind of vehicle that people like her only saw from afar. When she got close enough to look through the broken windows, she saw 3 small bodies moving in the back seats, strapped into high-quality baby car seats. They were triplets, appearing to be just a few months old, and their faces were red from crying made her heart clench. On the driver's side, a man was unconscious, his face stained with blood but clearly breathing. Even injured, and with his hair disheveled, it was impossible not to notice his striking good looks, the type of appearance that usually graced magazine covers or commanded boardrooms. His clothes, even crumpled from the accident, spoke of quality and wealth. The fugitive hesitated only for a moment before moving toward the back door, trying to soothe the babies with whispered words as she checked if they were injured. Her hands trembled slightly as she examined each child, looking for signs of trauma. They seemed only scared and hungry, but physically unharmed, protected by the expensive safety equipment that equipped the vehicle. It was then that a menacing voice cut through the air like a knife. "Get away from them right now, or I'm calling the cops." She turned sharply, her heart pounding, and came face to face with a 60-year-old man, tall and imposing, wearing clothes that screamed privilege and authority. His cold eyes analyzed her with a mixture of contempt and recognition that made her freeze. The older brother of the injured driver was a few yards away, clearly having arrived in another vehicle that she had not noticed in her concentration on the babies. "I recognize you," he said, his voice laced with cruel satisfaction. "Your face is plastered on posters all over the county, the woman who burned down the orphanage and ran like a criminal." The accusation hit her like a punch in the gut, bringing back painful memories that she struggled to suppress every day. But the baby's cries continued, and something stronger than her fear took over. Completely ignoring the threats, she turned her attention to the children, unlocking the car seats with steady hands despite the internal tremor. "They need help," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "They may be injured." "I don't care what you think you're doing," he retorted, pulling his phone from his pocket. "I'm calling the authorities right now." It was at that moment that the injured driver began to stir, groaning softly before opening his eyes slowly. His vision was clearly blurred, and he tried to get his bearings, the confusion evident on his bruised face. "The babies," were his first words, a desperate urgency in his hoarse voice. "Please, someone help the babies." The fugitive was already removing the first triplet from the car seat, cradling him against her chest in an instinctive attempt to calm him. "They're okay," she said softly, both to the injured man and to the child in her arms. "I'll take care of them." The older brother watched the scene with growing irritation, but something in the way she handled the children, the natural competence of her movements, made him hesitate for a crucial moment. The injured man tried to sit up, but stumbled, clearly suffering from a concussion. "Don't try to move," she instructed, now with 2 babies in her arms as she checked the third. "You hit your head." "You need to stay still until we get you to a hospital." "We're not going anywhere," the older brother interrupted, his voice laced with authority and disdain. "This woman is a wanted fugitive. I'm turning her over to the authorities right now." But the injured man, despite the confusion, focused his eyes on the scene before him. An unknown woman holding his adopted children with the tenderness of a mother, calming their cries with a naturalness that contrasted sharply with the tension of the moment. Something in her expression, of vulnerability mixed with fierce determination, touched a part of him that he rarely allowed himself to feel. "Wait," he said, his voice still weak but carrying an authority that made his brother pause. "She's helping." The babies stopped crying. And it was true. The 3 triplets who moments before filled the air with their desperate cries now rested calmly against her, tiny fists gripping her simple blouse as if they recognized safety in her arms. The transformation was remarkable, almost magical in its completeness. The older brother watched the scene with growing frustration, realizing that his authority was being questioned at the worst possible moment. "You don't understand," he insisted. "This woman is dangerous. She caused the death of innocent children." The accusation made the fugitive flinch, but she didn't release the babies. Instead, her arms closed more protectively around them, and her voice, when she spoke, carried a deep pain but also an unwavering conviction. "I would never hurt a child," she said, looking directly into the injured man's eyes. "Never." Something in that look, in the raw sincerity of her statement, resonated with him in a way he couldn't explain. Even through the fog of his concussion, he felt an inexplicable connection, as if he recognized something familiar in those eyes that stared back at him with such intensity. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft murmurs of the babies, who seemed finally tranquil in the fugitive's arms. The injured millionaire struggled to maintain consciousness, his vision still blurred, but something in the presence of that mysterious woman calmed him in an inexplicable way. His older brother, however, paced in circles, clearly frustrated by his brother's hesitation to support his decision to hand the criminal over to the authorities. "We need to get out of here," she said, assessing the situation with pragmatism. "The car is totaled, and he needs medical attention. Do you have another vehicle?" The older brother pointed to a luxury SUV parked a few yards away. "Obviously, but I'm not going anywhere with a fugitive." "Then stay here," she replied coldly, adjusting the babies in her arms. "But these children need a safe, warm place, and your brother needs rest to recover from his concussion." The millionaire tried again to sit up, this time managing to lean against the overturned car. "She's right," he murmured, running a hand over his wounded forehead. "The babies are my priority." "Your babies?" she asked, genuine surprise in her voice. "I just legally adopted them," he explained, his voice still weak but filled with emotion. "They're orphans. Their parents were my business partners and died in an accident 3 months ago. I promised I would take care of them." The revelation hit the fugitive like an unexpected wave. Here was a wealthy man, clearly accustomed to luxury and privilege, who had chosen to adopt 3 orphaned babies. The complexity of the situation left her momentarily speechless, especially considering her own history with abandoned children. The older brother snorted with disdain. "An impulsive and irresponsible decision, as always. You have no idea how to take care of children, and now you're trusting this criminal to help you." "I'm not a criminal," she said, her voice low but firm. and I know very well how to take care of children." "Of course you do," he retorted sarcastically. "That's why you burned down an entire orphanage." The accusation made something break inside her, and for a moment her defenses crumbled, revealing the raw pain she carried. "I didn't burn anything," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. "I tried to save them. I tried to save them all." The injured millionaire observed the expression of genuine pain on her face and felt something stir in his chest. Even through the confusion of his concussion, he could see that there was more to that story than his brother was willing to believe. "Let's go to the estate," he decided, leaning heavily against the car. "There we can take care of the babies properly, and I can recover." "You've completely lost your mind," the brother protested. "I'm not going to allow a fugitive to enter our family property." "It's not your decision," the millionaire replied, a firmness emerging in his voice despite his physical weakness. "It's my house, my children, my choice." The word children sounded strange but tender coming from his lips, and the fugitive realized that he truly saw himself as the father of those children, despite having adopted them so recently. There was something touching in his determination to protect them, even in his vulnerable state. Reluctantly, the older brother helped them transfer the babies and their supplies to the SUV. The rural estate was 20 minutes away, hidden among rolling hills and surrounded by acres of private land. It was the perfect refuge for someone who needed to hide, although the fugitive knew that it could also become a trap. During the trip, she held the 3 babies carefully, humming softly to keep them calm. The millionaire, sitting next to her, watched, fascinated, the natural way she interacted with the children. There was an instinctive competence in her movements, as if she had been born for this. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, knowing that any personal information could be used against her. "Does it matter?" "To me, it does," he replied, his eyes still blurred but sincere. "You're taking care of my children. I need to know what to call you." "Call me whatever you want," she murmured, avoiding his gaze. "Names are just words." The estate was impressive even in the fading twilight. A 2-story main house stood majestically in the center of manicured gardens, surrounded by smaller buildings that served as outbuildings. Everything exuded old wealth and family tradition, the kind of place that people like her only saw in movies. The older brother immediately took control of the situation, directing servants to prepare rooms and arrange for medical supplies. But his hostility toward the fugitive was palpable, and he made no secret of it from the property's staff. "She stays in the back room," he ordered dryly, "and I want someone to watch her all the time." "She stays in the room next to the nursery," the millionaire corrected, his authority cutting through his brother's attempt to control. "The babies may need her during the night." The nursery had been prepared hastily in recent days, but it was equipped with everything triplets could need: 3 identical cribs, a comfortable nursing chair, shelves filled with diapers, clothes, and expensive toys. It was clear that a lot of money had been invested in creating the perfect environment for the children. The fugitive moved through the space with natural familiarity, checking the room temperature, organizing the supplies in a more practical way, and adjusting the cribs for easier access during the night. Her actions were efficient and careful, revealing previous experience with childcare. "They'll need to be fed soon," she observed, checking the time. "And their diapers need changing. When was the last time they ate?" The millionaire ran a hand through his hair, clearly lost. "I don't know exactly. We were coming back from the lawyer when the accident happened, maybe 2 hours ago." "Too long for babies this age," she murmured, already moving to prepare the bottles. "They must be hungry and uncomfortable." As she worked, the millionaire watched her with growing admiration. There was a natural grace in her movements, a competence that contrasted sharply with his own inexperience. He had acted impulsively when adopting the triplets, moved by the promise he had made to their parents and by a sense of responsibility, but the practical reality of caring for 3 babies was proving to be much more challenging than he had imagined. "You have experience with children," he observed, not a question. She paused for a moment, her hands stopping from preparing the bottle. "I used to," she corrected softly. "Before everything fell apart." "What really happened?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. "With the orphanage?" The older brother chose that exact moment to enter the nursery, his presence immediately changing the dynamics of the environment. "Don't waste your time listening to her lies," he interrupted coldly. "Criminals always have touching stories to justify their acts." The fugitive closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar weight of accusation and judgment. When she opened them again, there was a cold determination in her gaze. "Think what you want," she said calmly, "but these children need care, and I'm going to give it to them. Temporarily," the older brother emphasized, "until we find a suitable nanny, one who isn't wanted by the police." The first baby began to cry, and she immediately picked him up, testing the temperature of the bottle against her wrist before offering it. The little one calmed down instantly, eagerly sucking the milk while she cradled him gently. The millionaire watched the scene with something close to fascination. There was something hypnotic in the way she moved, in the naturalness of her care. For the first time since he had decided to adopt the triplets, he felt hopeful that maybe, just maybe, he could actually be the father they deserved. "What are their names?" she asked softly, looking at the other two babies who were beginning to stir restlessly. "I haven't chosen them yet," he admitted, a vulnerability emerging in his voice. It seemed important to wait, to get to know them a little before deciding. She nodded, instinctively understanding the wisdom behind that decision. "They'll show you who they are," she said. "Children always show." While she fed the first baby, the other two began to cry in unison. Without hesitation, she stood up and began to rock all three at the same time, a feat that left both brothers impressed. There was a soft music in her voice as she began to hum, a melody that seemed to come from a deep, painful place in her soul. "How do you do that?" the millionaire asked, genuinely impressed. "Practice," she answered simply, but there were layers of meaning in her voice that he couldn't yet decipher. The older brother watched the scene with growing unease. There was something in the way she interacted with the children, something that stirred up old, uncomfortable memories. Memories that he preferred to keep buried, especially related to a nurse who had worked at the hospital where his brother was born, a woman who had mysteriously disappeared decades ago. The first weeks at the rural estate established an unexpected routine that completely transformed the dynamics of the house. The fugitive woke up before dawn with the first cries of the triplets, preparing bottles in the silent kitchen while the rest of the house still slept. The millionaire, whose concussion forced him to rest more than he was used to, often found her already taking care of the children when he finally managed to get up. There was a growing intimacy in these shared morning moments. He watched, fascinated, as she managed to feed two babies simultaneously while rocking the third with her foot, humming soft melodies that seemed to have a magical effect on the little ones. Their conversations were whispered so as not to wake the rest of the house, creating a private bubble where only they and the children existed. "Have you ever had children of your own?" he asked one of those mornings while she changed diapers with impressive efficiency. The question made her pause, her hands stopping for a moment on the onesie she was dressing the baby in. "No," she answered softly. "I never had the opportunity." "But you clearly have maternal instincts," he insisted, moving closer to better observe her technique. "It's as if you were born for this." "Maybe because I need to be needed by someone," she admitted, a vulnerability escaping her carefully constructed defenses. "For a long time, no one has needed me for anything other than running away." The millionaire felt something clench in his chest at that confession. There was a deep loneliness in her words that echoed his own experience of isolation, despite all his wealth and success. Before the triplets, his life had been an endless sequence of business meetings, stock investments that multiplied his fortune, and superficial relationships that never really touched his soul. "They need you," he said simply, "and so do I." The admission surprised them both equally. She raised her eyes to meet his gaze, and for a moment the connection between them was almost tangible. But the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway broke the moment, announcing the arrival of the older brother, who had made his constant surveillance a personal mission. "Family meeting in the library," he announced dryly, without bothering to greet either of them. "Now." The millionaire sighed, running a hand through his hair still disheveled from sleep. "Can't it wait until I finish helping with—" "Now," the brother repeated, his voice laced with authority. "It's about our temporary guest." The fugitive continued to care for the babies, pretending not to notice the tension that had settled in the room. But when they left the nursery, she could hear fragments of the heated argument that followed. The older brother had hired a private detective, had information about her past, spoke about dangers to the family's reputation. Meanwhile, she lost herself in the comforting routine of caring for the triplets. They had grown in the last few days, their little faces becoming more expressive, and she could already distinguish the unique personalities of each one. The eldest of the three was observant and calm, the middle one was restless and curious, and the youngest was affectionate and always sought physical contact. It was during one of these observation sessions that she noticed something strange. While checking the car that had been towed to the property, she discovered suspicious marks on the brakes. They weren't damages from the accident. They were deliberate cuts, clear and intentional sabotage. Someone had tried to hurt the millionaire, and by extension, the babies. The discovery chilled her to the bone. If someone was willing to sabotage a car with 3 innocent babies inside, what other threats could be lurking around that family? She needed to tell the millionaire, but she knew that doing so would reveal that she had been investigating on her own, which would certainly arouse more suspicion about her true intentions. That night, after the babies finally fell asleep, she found the millionaire alone on the back porch, looking at the stars with a pensive expression. His concussion had improved significantly, but there were still moments when he seemed lost in deep thought. "You seem worried," she observed, approaching cautiously. "My brother brought some information about you today," he said bluntly, turning to face her. "Things about the fire, about your escape. He wants me to turn you over to the authorities tomorrow." Her heart leaped, but she forced her voice to remain calm. "And are you going to do that?" "I should," he admitted, running a hand over his face. "It would be the right thing to do, the responsible thing, especially with the children involved." "But," she asked, detecting hesitation in his voice, "but I look at you with them, and I see something I can't explain," he confessed. "There's a genuine connection, a real care, and there's something in your eyes, a pain that feels very familiar." She moved closer, her resolve strengthening. "I need to tell you something about the accident. The car was sabotaged." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. "What did you say?" "The brakes were deliberately cut," she explained, her voice low but firm. "Someone wanted you hurt, or worse." "How do you know this?" he asked, his mind racing to process the information. "Because I recognize sabotage when I see it," she replied, "and because I know what it's like when someone wants to destroy you." The admission hung between them like a fragile bridge over an abyss. He studied her face in the starlight, looking for signs of deception, but finding only raw sincerity and vulnerability. "Why tell me this?" he asked. "You could have stayed silent and continued hiding here." "Because these children don't deserve to suffer because of the secrets and lies of adults," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I know too well what it's like to grow up surrounded by mysteries and accusations." It was then that he did something completely unexpected. He reached out and gently touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "Who are you, really?" he whispered. "Someone who lost everything, trying to do the right thing," she replied, allowing herself to lean slightly into his touch. Someone who was blamed for a tragedy she tried to prevent. "Tell me about the fire," he asked softly. She closed her eyes, the painful memories flooding her mind. "I volunteered at an orphanage in the city. There had been problems with the electrical wiring for months, but the director refused to spend money on repairs. On the night of the fire, I was doing my night shift when I smelled smoke." Her voice trembled slightly. "I managed to get most of the children out, but 3 girls were trapped upstairs. When I went back to save them, part of the ceiling collapsed. I barely made it out alive." "But you managed to save the girls?" he asked, already knowing the answer from the pain in her eyes. "2 of them," she whispered. "The third, she was too small, just 4 years old. When I managed to get to her, it was too late." Tears flowed freely down her face now. The next morning, they discovered that someone had altered the electrical records, making it look like I had approved the faulty system. There were false witnesses saying they saw me tampering with the wires. Everything was orchestrated to blame me. "Why?" he asked, his own voice hoarse with emotion. "Because I had discovered that the director was diverting funds intended for the orphanage's improvements," she explained. "I had evidence. I was ready to report him, but he got ahead of me." The millionaire pulled her into his arms instinctively, feeling her pain as if it were his own. "You tried to do the right thing," he murmured against her hair, "and you were punished for it." "How can you be sure I'm telling the truth?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "Because I see how you take care of my children," he replied. "Because I see the real pain in your eyes every time you look at them. No one can fake that kind of protective love." They remained embraced beneath the starry sky, 2 wounded souls finding solace in each other. But neither of them noticed the shadowy figure watching from the library window, where the older brother witnessed this growing connection with increasing alarm. The next day, he put his plan into action. The private investigator he had hired brought disturbing information. The fugitive wasn't just a runaway criminal. She was the daughter of a woman who had been a significant part of the millionaire's past. A nurse who had worked at the hospital where he was born. A woman he had secretly been in love with for years before she mysteriously disappeared. The revelation would change everything. But the older brother decided to use this information strategically. Instead of sharing it immediately, he began to plant subtle evidence, preparing the ground for a revelation that would destroy any possibility of a relationship between his brother and the fugitive. Meanwhile, the triplets continued to grow and develop under her watchful care. They could already recognize her voice, calming down instantly when she entered the room. The millionaire watched these interactions with growing admiration and something deeper, a feeling that he was beginning to recognize as love. 6 months had passed since that night on the rural road, and the property had been completely transformed. The triplets, now almost a year old, crawled through the hallways under the watchful eye of the fugitive, who had become much more than just a caregiver. She was the heart of that house, the person who brought life and warmth to a place that had previously breathed only tradition and formality. The millionaire had fully recovered from his concussion, but he found that he didn't want to distance himself from the children or the woman who had made his life complete in a way he never thought possible. His business meetings now took place on the property, and he had delegated much of his investment empire to devote himself to the family he was building. The sexual tension between them had gradually grown, fueled by accidental touches during childcare, lingering looks during silent meals, and by the forced intimacy of sharing parental responsibilities. But there was always the shadow of her past looming over them, keeping them in a careful dance of approach and hesitation. It was on a stormy morning that everything began to fall apart. The older brother had left for the city, supposedly to conduct business, but he returned with an unexpected companion. An elegant and impeccably dressed woman emerged from the luxury car, her cold eyes sweeping the property with an air of possessiveness. The fugitive was in the backyard with the triplets when she heard loud voices coming from the main house. Curious and worried, she approached the living room window and felt her blood run cold when she recognized the newcomer. It was the millionaire's ex-fiancée, the woman who had ended the relationship years ago and disappeared from his life without explanation. "I heard about your new family situation," the ex-fiancée was saying, her voice laden with barely disguised contempt. Adopted triplets and a fugitive criminal taking care of them. What a touching story. The millionaire was visibly tense, his posture defensive as he protected the entrance to the nursery where he would normally find the fugitive and the children. "What do you want here?" he asked coldly. "I came to claim my rightful place," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I heard you finally decided to start a family. I thought we could start over, do things right this time." "That was 5 years ago," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "You left me without explanation, disappeared completely. And now you want to come back?" "I had my reasons," she replied evasively. "But now the circumstances have changed, and honestly you can't think you have a future with that woman. You know who she is, what she did." The fugitive, hidden behind the curtain, felt each word like a stab. But it was what came next that really destroyed her. "She's the daughter of a nurse who worked at the hospital where you were born," the ex-fiancée continued, her voice taking on a cruel tone. "The same woman you always idealized, who disappeared when you were young. What a coincidence, don't you think?" The silence that followed was deafening. The fugitive saw the millionaire stagger slightly, as if he had taken a physical blow. His hands trembled as he processed the information. "How do you know this?" he asked, his voice almost inaudible. "Because I always knew," she admitted, her mask of civility finally falling. "I knew about your obsession with that nurse, how you looked for her, how you talked about her. That's why I kept her away from your life." The revelation hit everyone present like a lightning bolt. The older brother, who had orchestrated that meeting, watched with satisfaction as he saw his suspicions confirmed. But it was the next confession that changed everything. "I caused the fire in the orphanage," the ex-fiancée said casually, as if she were commenting on the weather. "I needed to eliminate any chance of her getting close to you. I never imagined that her daughter would show up years later." The world stopped. The fugitive felt her legs buckle, leaning against the wall as the truth hit her like an avalanche. The woman who had destroyed her life, who had killed an innocent child and ruined her reputation, was there, confessing everything with calculated coldness. The millionaire exploded in fury. "You did what?" he roared, advancing towards the ex-fiancée. "You killed innocent children, destroyed her life." "I protected our future," she replied, showing no remorse. "That woman was corrupting you, making you forget your social position, your destiny. And now her daughter is doing the same thing." "Get off my property," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Now." "Not until I take what's mine," she retorted, producing a recording from a phone. "I have here confessions from your dear fugitive admitting her guilt for the fire. A very convincing recording that could interest the authorities." It was a lie, obviously, but it had been produced with technology advanced enough to deceive most people. The blackmail was clear. Either he chose the ex-fiancée or the fugitive would be destroyed definitively. It was at that moment that the storm arrived in full force, cutting off the electricity and completely isolating the property. In the darkness and confusion that followed, the ex-fiancée made her final move. Taking advantage of the chaos, she tried to take the triplets, claiming that they would be better off under her care than with a criminal. But she underestimated the strength of the maternal love that the fugitive had developed for those children. When she heard the baby's desperate cries, she emerged from her hiding place like a force of nature, confronting the woman who had destroyed her life. "Let them go," she said, her voice filled with an authority that surprised everyone. "They have nothing to do with this." Ah, the heroine appears, the ex-fiancé mocked, holding one of the babies carelessly. Come and get them if you can. What followed was a devastating emotional confrontation. The fugitive, moved by unconditional love for the children and the need to protect them, faced her own traumas and fears. The millionaire, finally understanding the depth of his ex-fiancée's manipulation and cruelty, stood firmly alongside the woman he had learned to love. The storm raged for hours, but inside the house, other storms were being resolved. The ex-fiancé, confronted with the united determination of the couple and without any support from the older brother, who had finally realized the monstrosity of his own prejudices, saw her plans crumble. When dawn finally arrived, bringing clear skies and fresh air, profound changes had occurred. The ex-fiancé had been forced to publicly confess her crimes, freeing the fugitive from all false accusations. The older brother, ashamed of his actions and prejudices, had asked for forgiveness and retired discreetly. "Did you know?" the fugitive asked the millionaire as they watched the triplets playing in the sunny garden. "About my mother, about the connection." "I suspected," he admitted, pulling her closer. "There was something familiar in your eyes, in your way of being. But it didn't matter who you were before. It mattered who you are now. And who am I now?" she asked, allowing herself to relax against him for the first time in months. "You are the mother of my children," he replied, kissing her hair softly. "The woman who brought love and life to this house. The person who taught me that family has nothing to do with blood or social conventions." They were married in a simple ceremony on the property, surrounded only by the people who really mattered. The triplets, now a year and a half old, participated in the ceremony, crawling through the garden and eliciting laughter from everyone present with their innocent antics. A year later, the house echoed with new voices. The triplets had learned to speak, their first complete words being "mommy" and "daddy," addressed to the only parents they knew. The millionaire had completely restructured his business, creating a foundation dedicated to improving orphanages and protecting vulnerable children, using his wealth to ensure that tragedies like the one that had destroyed his wife's life never happened again. The fugitive, now officially free of all charges and with a new legal identity, had finally found the home she had always sought. It wasn't just the rural estate with its expansive gardens and rooms full of childish laughter. It was the family she had built with love, patience, and the determination to protect what mattered most. The emotional scars were still there. They probably always would be, but now they were part of a story of overcoming and redemption. She had learned that true love doesn't erase the past, but transforms it into something that strengthens the present and illuminates the future. And when she looked at the three little ones running through the gardens, their voices filling the air with pure joy, she knew that every moment of suffering had been worth it to get there. Finally, she was home. If you liked this wonderful story, please comment giving a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.